Today, Israel launches its ground offensive into Gaza City. A note and DNA link suspected gunman to Charlie Kirk killing.
While in New York, Luigi Mangione, the man charged with killing the CEO of UnitedHealth last winter, also heads to court. The U.S. military strikes another Venezuelan boat that it says was carrying narcotics.
And, with hours to go ahead of today's Fed rate meeting, a U.S. appeals court rejects Trump's bid to oust Fed Governor Lisa Cook. It's Tuesday, September 16th. This is Reuters World News, bringing you everything you need to know from the front lines in 10 minutes, 7 days a week. I'm Carmel Crimmins in Dublin.
And I'm Christopher Walljasper in Chicago.
Israel has started its ground operation into Gaza City. It's the main urban centre in the Gaza Strip, where hundreds of thousands of residents have been ordered to flee. Defence Minister Israel Katz posting on X that Gaza is burning. In the city, a relative mourns as a small body is carried away after an Israeli airstrike on a residential building. Israeli defence forces say troops have begun dismantling Hamas terrorist infrastructure in the city. This is a breaking story, and you can keep up to date on developments on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. The ramped-up ground offensive comes as a UN Commission of Inquiry says Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Here's Navi Pillay, head of the Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory.
We named the 3 individuals that we felt were responsible. One is the Prime Minister, the other the President, and the third is the former Minister of Defence.
The Commission cites the scale of the killings, aid blocks, forced displacement, and the destruction of a fertility clinic to back its findings. Israel declined to cooperate with the Commission. It rejects accusations of genocide, citing its right to self-defence following the deadly Hamas attacks on October 7th. Supporters of Charlie Kirk gather at the Kennedy Center in Washington for a vigil, days after the conservative commentator was shot and killed during an event in Utah. The FBI says the suspect, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, sent a text message before the attack saying he planned to kill Kirk and left behind a now destroyed note expressing the same intent. Investigators say they also found Robinson's DNA on the rifle used in the shooting. Authorities say Robinson acted alone, but they're still probing whether others were involved. Robinson is expected to appear in court via video link from jail on Tuesday, when formal charges are likely to be filed. Some Republicans, including Trump, have blamed liberal groups for the murder, despite a lack of evidence. Vice President J.D. Vance, while guest hosting Kirk's podcast, echoed right-wing calls for a broadside against leftist groups in response to the killing. Investigators have not publicly identified a motive.
Luigi Mangione is set to appear in New York State Court today. Mangione faces state charges of life in prison and, in the federal case, the death penalty for the December 4th killing of UnitedHealth CEO Brian Thompson in Midtown Manhattan. Luke Cohen is covering the case in New York.
There are a number of motions pending before the judge, Gregory Caro. Chief among them is Luigi Mangione's motion to dismiss the state indictment. Mangione argues that because he faces both state and federal charges, his constitutional right against double jeopardy to not be prosecuted twice for the same crime is being violated. In the federal case, he's charged with interstate stalking of Brian Thompson, the healthcare executive, and murder. In the state case, he faces charges of murder as an act of terrorism. And so what Mangione's lawyers have argued is they face a bind in defending him against these two sets of charges, because they say if he were to hypothetically argue in the state case, I wasn't trying to sow terror, I wasn't trying to intimidate anybody, the actions were meant to target an individual, it would essentially be self-incriminating in the federal case. And the prosecutors have essentially responded by saying, There are two different sets of charges, and he essentially brought any difficulty here on himself. They wrote, "The unpleasant options facing this defendant arise out of his own depraved actions."
A federal appeals court has blocked President Trump from firing Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The ruling comes just ahead of a key Fed meeting where policymakers are expected to cut interest rates to support a weakening labour market. The Trump administration accuses Cook of mortgage fraud, claims she denies. Meanwhile, the Senate has confirmed Trump's pick, Stephen Miron, to the Fed board, giving the president a voice in this week's rate decision. US economics editor Dan Burns and his team are covering the story.
It's the second straight setback for Trump in his bid to fire Lisa Cook. The appeals court has just ruled primarily on the due process, essentially saying that in firing Cook by a social media post, they deprived her of her constitutional right to proper due process in her removal, and that she was likely to succeed in that argument. So it's still a process ongoing. It's likely to go very quickly to the Supreme Court, and we don't know how they will rule. But so far, Cook has continued to prevail, and the Fed's independence has remained somewhat intact.
And with Stephen Miron on the Fed board, Dan says this week's Fed meeting could be fiery.
He's an ardent Fed critic. We expect that he could be somebody who dissents with a majority opinion at the end of the meeting this week. It's expected that the Fed is going to lower interest rates by at least 0.25 percentage point, and he may dissent in asking for and favoring a larger cut.
US and Chinese officials have reached a framework agreement to transfer TikTok's ownership to US control. The agreement is expected to be confirmed in a call between President Trump and President Xi Jinping on Friday. The deal could extend a deadline, which expires tomorrow, to finalise terms.
President Trump says U.S. companies should report earnings every 6 months instead of quarterly. That would be a major shift for corporate America. He's pitching the move as a way to cut costs and allow managers more time to focus on running their businesses. Right now, the Securities and Exchange Commission requires companies to report every 90 days. But Trump's idea would put the U.S. in line with the United Kingdom and Europe. Reporter Douglas Gillison says critics warn it could reduce transparency and increase market volatility.
This is at the center of a tension between the investment world and the corporate world for a long time. Companies want to report less frequently and investors want more information. And the concern among investors is that this would mean, for one thing, that companies could delay bad news. They could disguise it, hide it more easily than they can now. That's certainly something that's happened in the past. They also think that not learning when there's a significant change in the company's performance before, say, 6 months go by means that the market will be less efficient.
President Donald Trump says the U.S. military has struck a Venezuelan drug cartel vessel in international waters. 3 men have been killed in the strike, the second time the U.S. has struck a Venezuelan ship. In a post on Truth Social, Trump said the boat had been positively identified to have been, quote, extraordinarily violent drug trafficking cartels and narco-terrorists. The U.S. president has provided no evidence that the boat was carrying drugs, but claims traffickers threaten U.S. national security and vital interests. The Venezuelan government has yet to comment. A video posted on Truth Social shows a vessel in a body of water exploding and then catching fire. Speaking in front of cameras earlier on Monday, President Nicolas Maduro said recent incidents with the U.S. must be characterized as aggression, not tension.
¿Por qué están luchando ellos? Ellos no están luchando por la paz.
As a result, he says the U.S. has effectively thrown away its line of communication with the government in Caracas.
And for today's recommended read, China's global network of ports and the Trump administration's mission to weaken them. It's part of an ambitious and strategic effort to expand US maritime influence in case of conflict. We'll drop a link to that story in the pod description.
For more on any of the stories from today, check out Reuters.com or the Reuters app. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast player. If you're listening on a smart speaker, just ask for the latest news from Reuters 7 days a week. We'll be back tomorrow with our daily headline show.